First of all, thank you all for joining the session. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon from wherever you are joining. I'm Abhishek Sharma, a PhD student from University of Delhi. I'll be chairing the session on Korean Peninsula Cyber and Conventional Security. And welcome to this NKR Panel 4, where we'll be discussing issues relating to cybersecurity and conventional security, mainly touching upon nuclear weapons and nuclear armament. So before we start the session, I would like to give certain instructions that each speaker will be getting 20 minutes to present their topic. I'll be giving a reminder 5 minutes, first reminder 5 minutes before the session ends. The time for the participants ends, and the second reminder 2 minutes before. So I'll just raise my hand, 5 fingers for 5 minutes and 2 fingers for 2 minutes. I will also request all the panelists to stick to the 20 minutes timeline. And you can also elaborate on your topic in the following question and answer round, and you'll be having enough time to elaborate on the topic. So I'd like to introduce all our panelists and our discussant. So first is Wooyun Cho, who is a PhD student in the School of International Relations, Politics and History at Loughborough University, and a research intern at the North Korean Review. His research interest specializes in international security, with a major focus on alliance politics, security dilemma, and deterrence in the Korean Peninsula and the Indo-Pacific region. Wooyun is one of the young leaders at the Pacific Forum and a member of the War Studies Group at the British International Student Association. He holds a research fellowship at the ROK Forum for Nuclear Strategy. And before devoting to academia, Wooyun served as an army officer in the Republic of Korea Army. In this capacity, he was in charge of the forward observation team and contributed as an operation officer. He was honorably discharged at the rank of first lieutenant. Moreover, he also worked for the South Korean government as a Russian-Korean interpreter in the forums held in Russia. And Wooyun holds an MA in International Security from the University of Leicester and a BA in Russian Language and Literature from Korean University. Thank Wooyun for joining for the session. Second panelist is Hansfred Vaiphei. Is a final year master student of Korean Studies from the School of Language, Literature and Cultural Studies in Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. He is a scholar who shares a deep interest in socio-cultural studies and soft power diplomacy of South Korea, and is currently working on the same as his master dissertation. An inspiration Korean culture studies scholar and well-versed in the language, he often indulges in interdisciplinary studies, especially socio-political and diplomacy, to understand how contemporary cultural phenomena are a direct product of international diplomacy. So I will also be chairing the session, and I'm also a panelist. Hello, I'm Abhishek Sharma, a PhD student in Korean Studies at the Department of East Asian Studies, University of Delhi, where my research focuses on the intersection between new emerging technologies and the geopolitics of East Asia, as well as WPS and YPS agenda in the broader region. In 2022, I was selected as the emerging leaders for the National Committee on American Foreign Policy and also Quad Emerging Dialogues by the La Trobe University. My commentary analysis on Korea and Indian foreign policy, and especially on North Korean cybersecurity, Quad and Indo-Pacific, has been featured in South Korea Pro, 9-Line, South Asia Voices, among other publications. And I have completed my master degree in international relations from the South Asian University in New Delhi. We will also be joined by discussants, Stent, who is a PhD candidate at Victoria University of Wellington, where his study focuses on South Korea and North Korea policies since democratization 1988. Dylan received his Master of Global Affairs and Policy from Yonsei University, Graduate School of International Studies. He has published work in academia and popular publications, including articles in Asian Survey, The Diplomat, and News. His study focuses on national security, identity, inter-Korean diplomacy, and nationalism on the Korean Peninsula. And we'll also be joined by Yannis Tellidis. He's a professor of international relations, College of International Studies, Jung University. His area expertise is peace and conflict studies, terrorism and political violence, and international relations. He has done his PhD in IA from University of St. Andrews and master's in international conflict analysis from University of Kent. He was also the associate editor of Peace Building from 2012 to 20. He has edited 2 books researching terrorism, peace, and conflict studies, Interaction, Synthesis, and Opposition, and Terrorism, Peace, and Conflict Studies, investigating the crossroads. And his publication has been featured in many reputed peer-reviewed journals: Globalization, Studies in Conflict and Terrorism, Operation Conflict, East Asia Policy, and Critical Studies on Terrorism, among many others. And thank you all our panelists and discussants for joining session on Korea cybersecurity and conventional security. So now I will request Hansfred Vaiphei to start the session with his presentation.
Yeah, so my name is Hansfred Vaiphei. I'm currently, as Abhishek announced, I'm currently doing my master's in Jawaharlal Nehru University. And today the paper that I'll be sharing is cyberspace in the Korean Peninsula and its influences on South Korea as a state, along with a special emphasis on digital health and well-being of its citizens. So this as the world has entered a highly digitalized era, it is practically impossible to exclude cybersecurity in terms of national security. Hence, cybersecurity can be interpreted as all things the internet and its infrastructure as a national resource, and the prevention of the encroachment of this resource. So today's presentation will be divided into 4 parts, 4 sections. The first section, as stated here, would be focusing on understanding cyberspace and conceptualizing security measures regarding it to better analyze the Asian background, especially in the cases of North Korea and South Korea. Moving on, the second section of the paper will solely focus on North Korea and its cyber development. Then the paper will jump to its neighboring state and try to assess the cyber history of South Korea, the cyber attacks and threats that the South Koreans had to deal with, and determine the defensive capabilities of South Korea. Finally, this presentation will focus on how cybersecurity directly translates to the protection of personal information and privacy for South Korean citizens. There's a gap between data protection laws for South Koreans and the high rate of threats that this country faces. It has become alarmingly large and has ever grown quite larger after the COVID-19. So yeah, let's move on. Today, the first thing we'll go about cybersecurity and defining it. So the Oxford Dictionary defines cybersecurity as the state of being protected against the criminal or unauthorized use of electronic data or the measures taken to achieve it. However, as we all know, cybersecurity and the definitions of it highly vary and can at times even be misinterpreted. However, the other definition that I would like to look at is from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and they define cyberspace as a global domain within the information environment consisting of interdependent network of information systems, infrastructures, including the internet, telecommunication networks, computer systems, and embedded processors and controllers. Hence, they define cybersecurity as the ability to protect and defend the use of cyberspace. And then the third definition that I'd like to discuss right now is the DHS published this in 2014. They call cybersecurity as the activity or process, ability or capability or state, whereby information and communication systems and the information contained therein are protected from and or defended against damage, unauthorized use, or modification of exploitation. So by amalgamating all these definition, the definition that I came up with to substantiate this paper would be cybersecurity can be defined as a domain of domestic and international networks where data is stored and utilized by computer networks, the internet and telecommunications, and the capability to protect and defend these data, as well as the capability of countermeasuring attacks meant for enrichment of their data. So when we talk about cyber security using this definition, in the Korean context, it takes on a different light. So in December 19, 2014, there was a historical highlight when the region was brought into the public limelight by President Obama when he publicly condemned and blamed North Korea regarding the hack done on Sony Pictures Entertainment. So with this sort of a statement being issued by the head of US himself, it had a direct impact on how the world sees global politics, and cybersecurity was catapulted as one of the highest forms of political and diplomatic topics of the modern digitalized world. Then in the past 2 decades, the region has seen a series of political activism, and a dynamic of prolonged disturbances is common to the region, especially with the participation of China and Japan. One such incident that can be highlighted is the 2013 series of hacking attempts, which earmarked the financial institutions of Republic of Korea, especially. The South Korean government, at first, they tried to blame China as the culprit for it. However, after tracing the IP address, they could trace it back to the address of a local financial institute instead. So it is by looking at events like this, we can see that the Korean Peninsula has always been a hotspot area for public struggles, power struggles since the Cold War. And this has only been accentuated in the digital age, where North Korea possesses a threat to cyberspace, not only for South Korea, but its allies, including Japan and the US. So when forced into such a confrontational stance, South Korea has no option but to align its views on cybersecurity along with US and Japan, and thereby it can enable to bring forward its own cyber and digital security prowess to be at par with its allies, just to be able to fend itself off in the peninsula. So the third, moving on to the next section, we will be discussing about briefly about the North Korean cyberspace. So with the advancement in the digital sphere of the 21st century, North Korea, which has been at a confrontational standstill with the US and UK and its allies, found itself in another angle of confrontation in terms of cybersecurity and digital prowess. With the end of the Cold War, North Korea lost its most powerful ally, the Soviets, and the country was left with China as the sole backup, right? So when it was backed into this corner, North Korea then strategically pursued an asymmetric method that enabled the country to develop in areas where, from a conventional point of view, it did not compete with the US or ROK alliance. In the past 2 decades, the country has expanded greatly in terms of offensive as well as defensive cyber prowess and capabilities, which has enabled it to maintain a low dependence on its allies when it comes to cybersecurity. This is due to the fact that the act of calling for a cyber war, regardless of how small the scale is for North Korea, has become a much more viable option as compared to conventional methods of physical war. The cyber capabilities offer North Korea as a self-declared state, which is not recognized by the NPT as a nuclear weapon state. Hence, North Korea possesses a very strong cyber arsenal, which has a very high degree of destructive capacity. Even a small minor cyber attack can cause a significant amount of stress for US and the South Korean alliance, while the cost of doing so will be negligible to the North Korean government. Hence, cyber warfare has become a very feasible and a cost-effective instrument for North Korea to be able to gain the upper hand in the peninsula right now. So moving on, we'll be talking about the North Korean cyber prowess and the development road of cyber attacks. So up until now, North Korea's cyber resources have kept South Korea as the primary object, so that in times of conflict, it can trace vulnerable links in the defense networks of South Korea, and thereby it can destabilize the state instruments. According to the information which was presented by the Defense Committee of South Korea's National Assembly, acts similar to the above mentioned are usually conducted by Institute 110, which spearheads cyber espionage operations and is directly under the General Reconnaissance Department. One such cyber attack by Institute 110 was the release of links that consisted of details of South Korean military joint technical data, source codes of Aegis missile defense system, as well as the parameters followed for the identification of friendly or foe equipment, IFF. Another such case of North Korea's feat over its southern counterpart was the infiltration of the cyber command network of South Korea's armed forces, which showcased the cyber capabilities of the country to even hack into the most protected networks. This led to an early realization of the potential that cyber warfare holds as an asymmetric force by North Korea, and has been the prime factor of its cyber development. With Bureau 121 spearheading state-funded cyber attacks, there has been more than 10 instances of cyber attacks on North Korea between 2009 and 2016 alone, and the numbers are increasing and are expected to increase even more. When we talk about the South Korean cybersecurity, it is an undeniable fact that South Korea has grown as one of the fastest growing IT industries in the world, and has established itself as one of the world's cyber-dependent states. However, as compared to its digital advancement, the country still has a relatively unsafe infrastructure, making it very prone to cyber threats and attacks. Since the RGB was founded in February 2009, North Korea's cyber attack powers have grown at an alarming rate. This bureau spearheads and looks after hacking initiatives and activities whose primary aim is to cripple South Korean systems and exploit the data of South Korean agencies. This is a timeline of some of the significant attacks that happened. So in 2003, which is earmarked as one of the first cyber attacks against South Korea by North Korea, it was coined the 1.25 internet chaos. Other major cyber attacks that followed included the 2009 attack on distributed denial of service, the DDoS. A series of cyber attacks were also linked to 2013 as well as 14. And in 14, the Korea hydro and nuclear power plant was compromised. So in this, so how will South Korea retaliate the numerous attacks from its northern counterpart? When presented with this question, it is important to mention that South Korea has been more focused on maintaining a somewhat passive yet vigilant tone towards North Korea. Moreover, there is a lack of information regarding North Korean IT infrastructure and systems to retaliate with cyber attacks, while South Korea has to always consider the looming possibilities of any form of retaliation getting escalated to a full-fledged physical war. So in this case, the only method for South Korea is to maintain cyber deterrence in the peninsula. According to the National Cybersecurity Strategy of 2019, while it mentions cyber deterrence, it does not single out any particular agency or state. Hence, it can be stipulated that the South Korean form of deterrence can be seen more of a deterrence by denial, where the usage of national infrastructure and power cannot be used to establish a deterrence by the punishment posture for the country. However, this does not overshadow the need for the US-Korea alliance to conceptualize a joint initiative for cyber deterrence strategy, which should be an aspect of the tailored defense strategy, which is expected to highlight the asymmetric prowess and capabilities of North Korea. While North Korea has cyber warfare as an asymmetric advantage, there is a need for South Korea to utilize its alliance with the US as leverage, thereby allying with an asymmetric advantage. The alliance presents itself as a core asymmetric factor for South Korea, and this can be further substantiated by the extended deterrence that the US has provided to Seoul from external powers. Therefore, Seoul has the opportunity to build up the deterrence by denial model, which is already a work in progress, of course. With the cushion that the US provides, South Korea can keep practicing deterrence by denial and can depend on the US for deterrence by punishment, thereby giving itself a larger window of growth and diplomatic engagement, which would then further result in deterrence by entanglement in norms. So we will come up in the last section of the presentation, which is digital well-being in South Korea. So the term digital well-being, much like cybersecurity, can be interpreted in many ways, and it's quite multidimensional. For this particular paper, it can be seen as an umbrella term regarding digital life and cyberspace. Hence, it includes, but is not limited to, forming a healthy and symbiotic relationship between technology and humans, awareness of both pros and cons of digital engagement activities, as well as factorization and control of elements which affects one's digital health. So for the sake of this discourse, the definition of digital well-being is the ability to control and regulate a citizen's digital health with the help of consolidation of cyberspace and privacy of its users. And by doing so, the evident key issue, including legalized infringement, consent, as well as security measures regarding the South Korea's current structure of data sharing, can be brought to light. So the South Korean cybersecurity status and personal information is that the country's technological advancement has now been proportionate to its cybersecurity threats from outside, as well as the privacy rights of its citizens. It is important to mention that there have been legislative instruments at play for safeguarding and maintaining privacy protection in South Korea. Article 17 of the Constitution of South Korea provides its citizens with basic privacy rights. Hence, the citizen also have various legislations which provide privacy protection under both criminal as well as civil law. So while while the main instrument remains the Public Agency Data Protection Act of 1995, this was based on the guidelines of OECD. It includes the basic principles, and it limits the government collecting excessive data of the people. There is a need for derivation of other auxiliary privacy rights, which use the constitutional backdrop as its foundation. There should include the right of South Korean citizens to personal information. As while data laws and privacy laws have been a part of South Korean legislation for over 2 decades, the main traction was rapidly developed, can be traced back to the enactment of the Personal Information and Protection Act in 2011. So since we have less time, I'd like to skip over the technicalities of PIPE, and I'll just go on to the post-COVID and cybersecurity challenges. So on August 10, 2020, South Korea was able to flatten the curve of the first wave of COVID-19 and gain global applause for being one of the fastest countries able to contain the infection. However, this success has been tied closely to issues and concerns regarding the usage of personal data and privacy by the South Korean government. The methods that we used to effectively contact and trace infections among the citizens, which has raised questions on the South Korean government's use of personal information and data protection. Although it is understandable that the South Korean government will try to use these methods to effectively contain the spread of COVID-19 infections. However, this has led to...
To conclude, you have 2 minutes.
Okay, so however, this has ultimately led to both the South Korean citizens as well as the government desensitizing their concepts of personal data as well as protection and privacy. And for the conclusion, what I'd like to add here is right now, South Korea is faced with a compromising geopolitical position, even in the digital sector, which has led to the country developing and advancing its internal data and information security, which has led to the country developing one of the most strictest and comprehensive privacy protection legislation. However, faced with a national health crisis in the form of global pandemic, the sanctions of data protection is being questioned. Hence, it can be deduced that there is a need to take actions regarding reforming and rethinking what privacy means for South Korea. Otherwise, it might prove as an exponential setback in the case of North Korea's cyber attacks in the future. Okay. Thank you, everyone.
My paper mainly focuses on understanding, decoding, or analyzing how does the North Korea cyber strategy works in peacetime, and mainly its tactical aspect, but also having some strategic elements. And I'll be analyzing through this North Korea cyber strategy through the cyber operation evolutions. That is how their cyber operations have evolved through time since the early 1990s and starting major dominating in early 2000s, when North Korea effectively started using cyber as a tool to achieve its political and security objectives. So in this DPRK cyber strategy dimension, I've figured two dimensions which are based on effects. The first one is tactical and the second is strategic. So tactical refers to the cyber operations or the cyber campaigns undertaken by North Korea, which have basically effects which are not long-term in that aspect. And it mainly focuses on, for example, cyber espionage, data infiltrations, and other things. And the other strategic dimensions mainly focuses on how North Korea uses its cyber operations, and mainly focusing on offensive cyber operations in the strategic aspect. That is, for example, long-term kind of using of ransomware or malware for at least 6 months and using them or activating them at the time opportune to, for example, take out military data information which are very secured or classified in the sense. And I'll be giving examples going forward about what are those tactical and strategic operations which has taken. And I've mainly looked at the subject from the two perspective, but here I only stick to the peacetime aspect of it. So we usually talk about the use of cyber mainly in the context of peacetime and wartime. And for example, we see its application currently in Ukraine, where with the use of cyber by Russia, that is where we, for example, classify or template it with the wartime aspect. But usually peacetime is about where there is no conflict between the parties or adversaries, and how both of them use their cyber infrastructure and cyber capabilities to affect each other critical cyber infrastructure. So first I'll talk about North Korea cyber ideology, and here the intersection and continuation of how the legacy of cyber ideology traces to the earlier father of North Korea. So we see that how North Korea has followed the Kim Il-sung Chuche ideology since its inception, and this ideology which focuses on the state's independence on autonomy in all domains, be it political, economic, and foreign policy. And it has very influential aspect because this policy mainly focuses on how they can be more independent and not dependent on other countries for their own capabilities, be it in, as I mentioned, different areas, for example, economic, political, military. But cyber has risen as we say, the fourth area of operations apart from space. And North Korea has seen this area as kind of very important, strategic, and also tactical, which it can leverage for its political objectives. And so from that is the basic ground or foundation of how the cyber has been utilized, and how this fits into the states or regimes ideology of how it panders or brings in this cyber aspect to kind of attain all its objectives. The second one is Kim Jong-un's focus on science and technology. So going forward, when with this ideology background and foundations, Kim Jong-un focused on the importance of science and technology, and brought in, for example, institutionalized it through the, for example, colleges, Kim Il-sung University, and all those where they're mainly focused on computer programs, technical expertise, capacity building, or trainings of students who are interested in for example, cyber hacking, use of cyber as a tool. And in this, mainly under the Kim Jong-il era, North Korea focused on science to leverage, mainly thinking about leveraging it for the benefit of its nuclear weapons and military upgradations, in addition to its economic development. And he also recognized the importance of developing capabilities in the earlier 2000, where we see that how the cyber domain was mainly seen, was not that much important or dominant in the international sphere, and it was mainly seen by the regime as a kind of defensive and offensive, both for the both purposes. And he became the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-il became the first leader who introduced these structural and institutional changes in its military to deal with these cyber operations. And he brought in these changes and structured, for example, the State Affair Commissions, which was later led by the Kim Jong-un, the Supreme Commander of Korea. And taking this forward, the Kim Jong-un mainly kind of saw this cyber as a kind of all-purpose sword, as it refers to, where it can be used for different capabilities of purposes. For example, for serving political elites' wishes, for getting money in cases of through getting military information, attacking as for example, intimidation by attacking private corporations like Sony. At the same time, it also uses this its cyber offensive operations on states actor, mainly focusing on South Korea and United States. Traditionally, it has used this strategy, for example, so that it can leverage for its nuclear weapons. But with Kim Jong-un era, he has mainly entrenched this in its Byung-Chun policy, which focuses on pilot development, and has emphasized both on economic development and nuclear armament by using of its cyber tool. And this application of Byung-Chun policies, which we see in cyber domain, is an essential part of now the state's ideology. And this policy imagines the North Korea as an autonomous and able to deter the action of prospective enemy states with the application of offensive cyber capabilities. And to attain these diverse objectives, there are certain vectors which are employed, for example, information espionage, financial warfare, cyber theft, military operations, data infiltrations, etc. And the North Korea operates as a distinct space that so this in the cyberspace as an which kind of serve its overall strategic interests and tactical also. And this weaponization, as many scholars have called, of the cyberspace in the last decades have raised concerns, and the digitalization with the onset of COVID pandemic has only pushed and nudged forward this kind of cyber offensive operation sustained campaigns, and North Korea is building on this. So the third is the factors behind DPRK cyber strategies. As I mentioned, leveraging asymmetric capabilities, as the cyber structures and cyber facilities are very cheap as compared to its conventional counterparts like nuclear weapons or military equipments. It comes very handy for the regime to employ it and get its, for example, use it for financial warfare, and mainly now used for money laundering purposes. And the another factor which contributes to this is the avoiding sanctions regime. We have seen that how the sanctions on North Korea by the UN Security Council has mainly stopped it to venture into different areas, and testing. And the third one is it's testing its adversary cyber infrastructure resilience, and also supporting the support of DPRK nuclear weapons and ballistic missiles. So these are the four factors behind the DPRK cyber strategy. Now talking about DPRK peacetime cyber strategy, it mainly focuses on weaponization of cyberspace during peacetime for tactical objectives, primarily focusing on offensive cyber operations. And here, offensive cyber operations mainly when it talks about use of coerced or force, or for example, use of deterrence, forced deterrence on adversaries. And it's a kind of, as opposed to defensive, where the state tries to increase its resilience of cyber infrastructure. Of the defensive offensive cyber operations mainly focuses on how the states can explore or exploit the vulnerability of the other states by repeated attacks and kind of find loopholes in their cyber infrastructure. And these are done through various vectors, as I mentioned, through information espionage, financial warfare, cyber theft. And the main North Korea attack vectors which we see is the DDoS, malware, spear phishing, phishing, watering hole attacks. All these are the techniques which North Korea uses through its non-state and state actors targeted towards US and Republic of Korea. So as I mentioned earlier, these both have strategic implications. In some cases, not always. For example, the attack on the kind of the stealing of informations regarding the OPCON, which was seen as very a kind of a threat or stealing of information, which could have a strategic implication, because North Korea can predict what are the techniques, what are the plans which the alliance would like to employ in case of conflict. And in North Korea case, there's a close cooperation between state and non-state actors. But this has been mainly recently has been mainly a kind of fastened with the onset of virtual assets providers, cryptocurrency exchanges, and mixers and NFTs. And these are the mainly new technology or services which North Korea sees now as a major kind of area from which it can leverage its economic fund. So US NSA and New Merger has said that the DPRK used cyber to gain what they estimate up to a third of their funds to fund their new missile program. So through this, we can understand how important it's to kind of understand or analyze how they have employed their offensive cyber operations to get funds to fund their nuclear programs and even missile programs. And we see kind of the capacity on the how in this year how many they have launched. So this directly links to it, not only their cyber capability, but also to their nuclear weapons strategy and all those. So this, as a short of time, I'll just finish. This is the structure of North Korea cyber infrastructure, where it's mainly divided into RGB, which deals with the military aspect of it, which deals with the civilian infrastructure, and GSD, which deals with the military aspect of it. And here there are so many actors, but Bureau 127 is one which focuses on the financial and money laundering aspect of it, mainly targeting the new services like, as I mentioned, cryptocurrencies, NFTs. So these are the evolution of cyber operations earlier. And these are the attack starts from 2009, going to 10 days of rain attack. Then in 2013 to DDoS attack on South Korea. And we all know about the, most people know about the Bangladesh central bank attack, where it tried to almost take out $1 billion US dollars of money through espionage. And also the 2017 WannaCry ransomware, which affected countries globally all over. And an Operation North Star, which was the latest, where it attacked the new emerging sectors, which are cryptocurrency NFT based. So, so I would like to just conclude by 2 points that the new attacks when we talk about cyber attacks, offensive operations, are mainly divided into 2 parts, which is the traditional, and the other is the new, which is dynamic. So with the new attacks, we talks about how they have almost stolen $571 million of money through the use of cyber operations through cryptocurrencies, and among the $2 billion which have they stolen. And these are mainly attacks on cryptocurrency mixers, and which are, for example, the Horizon attack, the attack on Tornado Cash, and these are all the money heist which they use. So so between 2009 and 13, it has almost costed around South Korea $8.5 million USD. and North Korea state-sponsored cyber hacking not even targeted the US and Republic of Korea, but also other states in Europe, Asia, North America, including Bangladesh, Slovenia, India. And these attacks are mainly targeted for different purposes. For example, in India, attacked the Kundakulam nuclear power plant to steal secrets of nuclear clean energy. It also attacked Bangladesh, as I mentioned before. It also attacked in Europe on defense companies to steal their plans for example, military equipments and others. And it attacked many companies in North Korea also, for example, the defense manufacturer, the military industrial complex. So it employs its offensive cyber operations for various purposes, not only on gathering of money. Finally concluding, I would say that, as I mentioned before, it's differentiated into two parts, that is traditional versus new. The traditional mainly focused on the characteristics of those attacks were repeat and reuse approach. For example, employment of ransomware or malware. So many analysis has been done on that, and it says that there's no very drastic difference in the employment of the attacks. The codes remains very same with certain differences, but the strategies or the idea or the tactics behind TTVs behind those attacks remain same. But the new approach is adapt and adopt approach, which is only also shown by the dynamic of the sector. New sector, as we see that the cryptocurrency or NFT sector is very, very dynamic, volatile. So it's very difficult for the state also to, for example, non-state actors and DPRK to kind of manage through this volatility. So primary objective for traditional is political and security objectives, and for new attacks, it's financial and security considerations. The strategic dimensions of traditionals have been very more as compared to the new attacks, where new attacks focuses mainly on financial frauds, having illicit money and money laundering. The tactical dimension of traditional are more as compared to new. But if we do an analysis, both focuses on, for example, the very short-term attacks or kind of for intimidation, creating fear and all those. The risk with traditional attack is less when we talk about in tactical sense, and the new attacks mainly have more risk or in that sense. The weakness of traditional is that it's more predictable. The state, for example, US has been able to kind of deter these attacks because they are more predictable, and the new attacks are more unpredictable because of the nature of the sector, because there are new technologies coming, so the state has to adapt to these technologies, find new TTPs and all those things. So just concluding with these remarks, I'll say that the strength has that the traditional has both strategic and tactical aspects, but the new is highly tactical, so it doesn't have much strategic dimension. So the state sees these new approaches are mainly kind of funding its weapons program, and all those to gain more and more money. And thank you.
All right, thank you everybody for coming here. My name is Wooyun, and I'm currently studying in the UK. So basically, greetings from England. So I'm a PhD candidate at Loughborough University, and I am actually researching great power competitions for my PhD thesis. However, as I'm a South Korean, and as I was an ex-army officer in the South Korean army, I am highly interested in nuclear weapons, especially, of course, North Korea's nuclear threats. So as a side project, I am working on revisiting North Korea's motivations for nuclear armament. Yes, so here is the table of contents today. First of all, I would like to introduce briefly about my project, and I will start with some historical reviews and North Korea's nuclear motivations, both external and internal, and conclusion. Here I added a historical review. It means that for my project, I am currently gathering and analyzing historical sources just to find out how North Korean leadership was shaped to go for nuclear weapons. Yeah, so like the introduction, like I would like to briefly introduce how I ended up with the current research topic. So given like the Russian invasion of Ukraine reminds us of the powerful status of nuclear weapons in international relations. As Vladimir Putin is cornered in this conflict, he is consistently threatening to use nuclear weapons against Ukraine and possibly the Western world. And like in Europe, where I am living right now, this nuclear problem is quite serious. So I guess we need to be aware in the Korean context that if Moscow uses tactical nuclear weapons, it may increase the possibility that the dictator in Pyongyang could follow. So therefore, I argue that North Korea's nuclear development is an equally dangerous movement for the Korean Peninsula and the Indo-Pacific. So North Korea's nuclear problem is really important for the Korean Peninsula and for the world, of course. Therefore, in order to understand or in order to deeply understand its problem, I argue that why North Korea wanted to have nuclear pause is significant. So indeed, my main argument is that various factors combined have motivated Pyongyang's obsession with nuclear arms. I know like it seems kind of cliche. Of course, a lot of factors combined affected its motivation. However, I noticed that existing literature suggests a different thing. The existing literature, interestingly, suggests whether like there are two divisions of existing literature. One group of scholars argue that North Korea was mainly motivated by US nuclear threat, and another group of scholars say that it was a domestic reason to pursue nuclear armaments. But however, looking into the historical documents and some primary sources written by North Korean leaders themselves, I reached a conclusion that only one international or one domestic factor cannot explain this motivation. So my article is in two parts. The first analyzes the external motivations with primary sources and international relations theories. And the second part investigates the internal one with North Korea's ruling ideology, which is Juche ideology. I would like to emphasize that my paper is analyzing Juche ideology because in the existing literature, so far, like, of course, there could be, but I haven't found any articles analyzing North Korea's nuclear motivations in the lens of Juche ideology. So I would like to say that I have acquired primary sources from the Wilson Center, Cold War History Archive, and the South Korean government. Yeah, so like let me start like the history of the North Korea's nuclear development very shortly. So indeed, it is known that Kim Il-sung, the first dictator of North Korea, decided to develop nuclear weapons in 1953. However, I found like the Soviet document suggests that Kim Il-sung officially requested to provide nuclear technology in 1956. I think that could be the start of the Kim Il-sung's firm decision to be a nuclear weapon state. And also documents show that North Korea at first consistently emphasized the purpose of nuclear technology was purely peaceful. However, also like I found one Hungarian historical document that Pyongyang never shared its nuclear data with the Kremlin. So like in this document, like Soviet diplomats in the North Korea complained to Hungarian diplomats that they have no idea about North Korea's nuclear operations. Then the critical questions remains, why did North Korea decide to develop nuclear weapons, even taking a huge risk of decoupling with the Soviet Union? I mean, like the Soviet Union had like a same status to North Korea as the United States has like a big influence on South Korea right now. But my question is why? Like, why did they, was it worth it? I mean, so I started my analysis with external motivations. I concluded there are two main motivations externally. One is the rivalry with South Korea, and the second one is the change of balance of power. So drawing on documents which were released from the Soviet archive, I found that the North Korean leadership had a strong desire for self-help. And also I concluded with the economic reason, nuclear weapons could be the cost-effective options for Pyongyang. And secondly, in the change of balance of power, I concluded that following the Malta summit, when the end of the Cold War just begun, I found that in East Asia and particularly in the Korean Peninsula, there was a security vacuum, which was quite unacceptable to North Korea, which also Kim Il-sung, in his own words, admitted. Then, of course, here in this part, I analyzed how South Korea's node politic, where South Korea made a diplomatic normalization with China and Russia. So yeah, I analyzed that. And of course, following that, I also implemented some realism theories why North Korea was motivated to survive in the anarchic system and in East Asia with nuclear weapons. And I move on to the internal motivation. As I mentioned before, like when I just first ambitiously started this project, I thought that Juche ideology could be the main part of my paper because it seemed to be very original and using my language skill, which I'm native in Korean, I thought that I could do better. But yeah, as my main argument is that not single factor can affect nuclear weapons. Of course, Juche ideology is important, but external motivations were also important. So Juche ideology, probably many of us know, like it has absolute power in politics, society, military, economy, and all aspects of the nation. So Juche ideology is a kind of law when it comes to like if we have to like to define the status of this ideology. Therefore, the second dictator of North Korea, Kim Jong-il, even himself devoted an 84-page long article to address the significance of Juche ideology and the in-depth justification for choosing it to rule the country. So in this article, Kim Jong-il described self-defense as a bedrock factor for North Korea's survival. So here I put a lot of emphasis on the word self-defense because self-defense is quite emphasized in Kim Jong-il's writings. And I found that this self-defense wording can be a clue for North Korea's internal motivations for nuclear development. So therefore, I argue that through the acquisition of nuclear armament, Pyongyang could achieve a balance of terror externally, and hence regime consolidation could be followed in domestic politics. The realization of Juche ideology directly connects to securing the Kim family dynasty's legitimacy, and the completion of nuclear armament could serve as proof of realizing North Korea's national ideology, identity, and self-defense. So the Kim family could eventually internally justify nuclear armaments under the slogan of realizing Juche ideology, which put self-defense fundamentally. Because as you know, like in the late 1990s and the early 2000s, North Korea encountered severe economic sanctions from the United States and international organizations. But despite such harsh sanctions on North Korea, the North Korean leadership could justify to go for nuclear weapons, to keep going, because they could use it as a propaganda to realize Juche ideology. So yes, the conclusion. So I emphasize a lot of times, but North Korea's motivation for nuclear weapons is not caused by one single factor. So North Korea's nuclear force is an entangled mixture of international and domestic situations, which cannot be solved at once. So therefore, like I reached a pessimistic conclusion that the Kim dynasty will unlikely abandon its nuclear forces in the foreseeable future. So therefore, I just finished my paper with suggestions that policymakers worldwide now need to focus more on deterring Pyongyang's nuclear weapons. All right, that is all for me, and thank you for listening.
Now I'd like to go to our discussant. I would like to request Professor Tellidis to give your comments on the respective presentations.
Yes, hello. Thank you very much. Thank you to all for these interesting words. I've been trying to, obviously it's a little bit difficult to try and marry the nuclear with the cyber, although we are dealing with technology any which way. But obviously the nature of the technology is different. However, when I've been reading your papers, something that has been coming up, and also in my research, my most recent research about cyber and how the cyber and the digitalization can impact positively or negatively with peace processes and conflict resolution. This is my angle these days, right? But what became apparent when I was reading your papers and listening to your presentations is this notion of the cyber, and to what extent do we know what we mean by cyber? It came up in the two presentations, in Hansfred's and in Abhishek's presentation, when we were dealing with the definition. But I want to go, it's not just a definitional problem. I think it's more of a conceptual problem, right? We have this tendency nowadays to affix cyber, the word cyber, into everything, but that doesn't necessarily mean we are dealing with something different. Like, for example, we're talking about cyber war, right? And essentially, arguably, your presentations were about cyber war. But then how is that different from, let's say, the usual drone operators, right? Who show up in a container somewhere in the Nevada desert from 9 o'clock in the morning until 5 p.m. in the evening. They fulfill their strikes, they fulfill their targets, and then they go home. Is this cyber war, or is this a traditional form of warfare? So the lines are blurred, and of course we can talk about, you know, the fighter jets getting their coordinates from GPSs and fed through satellite internet connections and so on. Is that cyber warfare, or is that traditional warfare? So the examples that I'm using here, they're only because I want to highlight how much conceptual confusion and lack of clarity there is about what is cyber. Which runs completely opposite of our predisposition to talk about cyber terrorists, cyber criminals, cyber, you know, cyber soldiers, cyber everything. But where does analog stop and cyber start? This is the kind of conversation that in academic terms, in the academic context, in the scientific context, This is the conversation that we should be having. Unless if we pretend that, you know, a conversation that you have in the pub is just as good as having it in academia, which has never been the case. So this is in terms of trying to put everything together. This is one point that I wanted to raise. A second point is when we're talking about cybersecurity. Again, I am a little bit unconvinced, because it seems to me that we are talking more about cyber insecurity than we are talking about cybersecurity. Okay, so the topic is cybersecurity, but we keep on talking about a great list of things that will go wrong, which is not necessarily the same with other topics of security. It's not necessarily the case, for example, with environmental security. It's not necessarily the case when you're talking about energy security. Arguably, somebody would say it's not even the case when you're dealing with terrorism and broader political violence. That's it. You're not constantly looking for things to go wrong. There is an aspect of human security. So if this goes wrong, what are the steps necessary for me as a state, as an authority, as an agency? What are the steps necessary for me to take to protect human populations, right? Communities. Which brings me to a third point, which I guess this is the point where nuclear and cyber and the entire panel, in other words, gets more unified. And that is that the cyber is very much like the nuclear as it stands currently, in the sense that it equals more state security or national security than it equals human security. Okay, and there's a number of reasons for that. The first reason is because, as with many other things and many other topics and many other insecurities and threats and risks, it is very appealing to the state, right? Obviously, the state identifies its vulnerabilities, but it doesn't necessarily have a great interest in securing millions and millions of people in the cyber domain. Okay, obviously that's not the case with the nuclear, but you know, in so far as state infrastructure does, state capacity and authority is concerned, this is where I said it's cyber equals state security or national security, if you prefer more traditional terminology. And the second point about this, so that's from the point of view of the state. The second point, which is from the point of view of the individuals, and that brings me into my most recent research now, is we like to complain how in the relations between people and state, right, individuals and authorities, we like, as individuals, we like to complain how the state hasn't done enough, right? That's a very, pretty much a constant feature of politics, right? Citizens always complain of like, where was the state? What has the state done about this? Blah, blah, blah. But in this particular topic of cyber, in my research, what I have found is that we are also very negligent as individuals. Like, let me give you an example. How many websites have you accessed that says, click, accept the terms and conditions? How many times have you read, and I mean read, the terms and conditions? Maybe 1 out of 100,000. Usually you're just skimming through, if you're skimming through at all, you're just, you know, scrolling, click yes, please take me through. I'm in a rush. It's convenient for me, right? But you don't know, what are you agreeing to, right? Maybe you agreed, you know, for the Lucifer's coming to this planet. Who knows? But you're not going to know unless you read through the terms and conditions, right? Maybe you just agreed to hand in your soul to the devil, but you're never going to know unless it happens or unless you actually sit down and read it, right? So in that sense, and in this context of individual versus state, what I tend to find time and again is that there is a worrying level of cyber illiteracy, if I can put it this way. Like dependence on and reliance, over-reliance on cyber becomes nothing but bigger and bigger and bigger every day. right? From the moment we wake up to the moment we go to bed, especially us, and in this day and age, we are constantly connected, whether through a phone, a tablet, a desktop, a laptop, and so on, for entertainment purposes, for conference purposes, for research purposes, publication purposes, teaching purposes, and so on. So we are connected 24/7, but we don't necessarily know that much about how to keep ourselves safe and secure online. And the third point that I want to raise on top of that, or with regards to that, and go back to the point I raised earlier about the state and why the state doesn't care. From my experience, especially here in South Korea, for instance, as a citizen or as an individual, I have to deal with civil service, right? Tax agencies, ministries, immigration offices, and so on and so forth. So I need, and I can, thankfully, I can do my business. I can conduct my business online. But what is worrying, to me at least, is that in all these cases, for example, I have to verify who I am, right? I have to verify my identity. Now, because this is a civil service, this is a department that belongs to the state bureaucracy. But that process, that procedure of verifying your identity is being handed out to a private organization. For instance, I can confirm my identity if I can confirm my mobile number. So for that reason, the state connects me to the private company that is the mobile carrier, okay? And that mobile carrier will refuse to confirm my identity to the state department that I want to contact unless I agree to receive advertising, which is unless I agree to share my personal data, okay? Now, obviously, there are checks and balances and all that. Hopefully, they are being upheld. But in the very minimum, it becomes very annoying because 5 minutes after you have completed the process, you're just flooded with adverts on SMS adverts, on your Kakao or Viber or WhatsApp or similar applications, messaging applications, and so on. You get a lot of spam in your emails, etc., etc., etc. So this is the best case scenario, which, to bring it in line with the two presentations we had in this panel, you can imagine how things can escalate pretty quickly if something goes wrong from a malevolent actor like North Korean hackers or any other black hackers for that matter. How much personal data, how many citizens, how much of citizens' personal data can be endangered? So I think the reason why I'm raising all these are, as you understand, these are not directed at any one specific of you, but I thought that they were interesting points in the sense of having a critical understanding or having a critical approach towards what do we mean by cyber. And because usually cyber is, or my experience about conversations about the cyber, and especially the cyber security, is we just, when we have a topic like that, we just go straight into what makes us insecure, right? But before that, we need to tackle all these things like the cyber illiteracy that I just mentioned. How do you make somebody secure without necessarily educating them about how to keep themselves secure, rather than having them expect that you as a state or you as a structure, you're gonna do everything to keep them secure, right? So there needs to be a detailed understanding and a more detailed conversation about whose role falls under what category and the implications and all that. Now, moving into the individual papers, I did enjoy all of them. I have to admit, but again, in the spirit of being critical, and please allow me to be as honest as I can. In Hansfred case, I found quite interesting, well, very interesting, the digital well-being, the topic of digital well-being, the way that you've put it. I think pretty much is in line with what I've been discussing just now about the roles of the individual and how they overlap with the roles of the state and all that. But my problem with that is I fail to see how it links with the, let me say, the earlier topic of the paper, because the first half of the paper is about the insecurities posed by North Korea and the cyber approaches of North Korea and how it loves to hack South Korea, and whenever it has the chance, also the American databases or American networks and so on. So in that sense, my understanding or my perception was that I was dealing with two different papers that for some reason they were put in one. I think it would be much better, and you would be better off if you split these two into two different papers and try and broaden the argument in their own categories, rather than just trying to marry these two, because they feel awkwardly out of place. They make a lot of sense separately, and they make for some very interesting conversations separately, but the two of them, they feel mismatched. And I wasn't very comfortable with that, even not just in the presentation, but especially in your article, when I was reading the article as well. In Abhishek's case, again, one of the greatest overviews of methods, strategies. I'm pretty sure you had much more to say. If you had the time, I would love to hear even more details about, you know, the exchanges, the cryptocurrencies, all these different methods of what North Korea does and how do they do it, right? And the implications and the strategies and all that. But as I was reading your draft, that fascination was coupled with, okay, here's when he's going to tell us where this is going, right? And then you turn the page and you're like, okay, that's great, but where are we going? Where is this taking me? I keep reading and I keep reading, but what is the end point? So it ended up feeling like what I said in the beginning, an overview of strategies, tactics, methods, you know. If it is to become an academic paper, you always need to keep the main question you need to have at the very front of your brain is, what am I trying to prove with this? Are you just trying to give us an idea of what North Korea does? Because that is not new. I'm pretty sure a lot of people are aware of how they do things and what they're interested in. Are you trying to tell people that what they are doing or what they've been doing up until now is wrong, so there's a better way to secure ourselves vis-a-vis North Korea? Now that's something new. Okay, so you need, what you have is definitely not useless, but it needs to be more contextualized, right? So this is what we know about North Korea. Now, how do we use this to our advantage, or how do we use this in a way that minimizes whatever repercussions North Korean agency, as in activity, right? North Korean agency might have either on South Korea or in other countries, okay? And lastly, with Wooyun's case, good morning, Wooyun. Thank you for staying up for this. I appreciate it, and give my best to Caroline when you next see her. One of the most fascinating, for me at least, I'm not a specialist, I'm not an expert in the history of North Korea. So in that sense, I found it an excellent historiographical approach to how people decided to implement all this into one huge policy, right, and get to the point that they got. But again, similar to Abhishek's, the one and only question is, where are we going with this? Because you said, and you made it very clear, and I appreciate that, you know, up until now, people have been saying, oh, it's simply because of internal reasons, or it's simply because of external. And you come and say, well, no, it's actually because of both. But is that it? Because that is pretty much self-explanatory. So maybe I'm missing something out here, because again, there's been a lot of scientific or academic innovation where nobody actually said the most explicit thing, and that is what made it innovative. So perhaps that's why I'm reserved in my criticism towards you, not criticism, my critique towards your article, But that is probably because I'm not an expert in this particular field, in the history of the development of nuclear war weapons by North Korea, right? So perhaps you could benefit, and I'm pretty sure that in your environment in Loughborough will help you flesh this out more clearly. Same kind of question as Abhishek. What is it that I want to do with this? Where am I going with all this? Because you have a ton of interesting information. It's just that you just need to convince people that this is how it can be useful. I'm gonna leave it there because I ran out of time, and I don't want to get time from Dylan because I also want to hear his opinion.
Thank you so much, Professor Tellidis. Now I would like to go to Dylan to give his comments on the paper. Thank you.
Oh, hi guys. So can you hear me all good? All good? Cool. So yeah, thanks for the presentations. I thought they were pretty good and quite diverse. I think it's a little bit difficult for everyone to get their ideas across where nuclear weapons and cyber stuff is quite different. But I did see how there were some similarities, right? So they're all to do with technology. They're all to do with asymmetric and state-centric ideas, which I think is kind of why they were put together. So that was quite good. But as I just want to start off, I think the conclusions drawn by everyone paints a bit of a pessimistic picture. So it's not exactly wonderful moving forward, but I think it's what you kind of have to do when you're in this area in some way. So I think that was quite interesting. So I'm mainly going to talk about Hansfred and Wooyun's papers, but Abhishek, I think some of this stuff will actually, you can probably answer as well. So there's going to be a lot of questions that I think all of you could probably look into and help answer. So I'll start about Wooyun's paper. So I think very good ideas overall, and I'll discuss those in a bit more detail shortly. But I think your premise about the Ukraine was interesting because for me, reading about nuclear weapons for many years, I kind of think of Ukraine a little bit differently, right? So Ukraine, one of the few countries in the world to give up its nuclear weapons, right? So I think if North Korea is looking at Ukraine now and seeing Russia invading them, I think that may give them a bit of a sense that we're not going to give up our nuclear weapons anytime either, right? So I think that was kind of an interesting thing that I thought of straight away when you started talking about that. So I thought that was quite good. I basically agree with the conclusions that you draw. So I think there is obviously no simple causality and no single variable can explain why a state necessarily makes decisions, right? So I think it's kind of an impressive way of looking at it. And I think the various factors is definitely not a cop-out. So it's not simple to do that. And I think I commend you for trying to do that as well. And I agree that existing literature is quite weak in that regard, especially realists when they argue that North Korea is primarily motivated by the US nuclear threat. I mean, yeah, sure. We all know that to a certain extent, but lots of countries are under threats from other countries and they don't decide to make nuclear weapons, right? So I think looking at some other factors is quite good. And just as an aside, my own study takes a historical look at South Korea's unification formulas and the unification policy towards North Korea, also looking at external reasons, but also looking at other historical circumstances, critical juncture ideas, and South Korean national identity as driving forces, right? So I think you're kind of going down that same track, and you might want to even look at some of those more explicitly and just state that more in what you're actually looking at. Because I think, as was just mentioned, your main ideas and the reasons for your research can literally be that, just saying that there are these things that happen. There are a variety of things that happen, and we have to know that if we want to understand North Korea's nuclearization, because I think if we want to talk about North Korea's denuclearization down the line, there's obviously going to be a multitude of factors there as well, right? So if you're just concentrating on one thing and then North Korea is thinking you're just talking crap, like you have to understand that, right? So you have to understand why they did it in the first place. And I think that's understanding those range of ideas is quite useful. So I kind of enjoyed how you brought in Juche to a certain extent, but also I think Juche also kind of over complicates things to a certain extent. So I think Juche is obviously something that we all talk about, we all understand, but we all don't understand at the same time, right? I think in a certain way, nuclear weapons is I think it's simpler just to think of it as a propaganda ploy to a certain extent for the domestic audience. I think that's easier to understand it in that fashion rather than having to go through all the explanation of what Juche is, for example. I think it's more simplistic just to say that it's a great propaganda tool to keep the legitimacy of the Kim Jong-un regime in power, right? So I think that might be an easier way of just explaining that, rather than having to go down the sometimes the rabbit hole of what Juche means, because that, I mean, there's so many different scholars who look at Juche in various different ways. Either it's a myth, as some people say, or other people say it's a state religion. So you're going to have to go through those various ideas if you want to get to a conclusion on that. And I think what adds credence to the idea that it's more propaganda, like even if you look at that recent ICBM test a couple of days ago when Kim Jong-un had his daughter with him, like I think that's more easily explained through the same kind of ideas, where the message he's giving to the world is not, look at me, I'm a great father necessarily. It's more like, here's my daughter, look at this weapon I've got, aren't I great, that kind of thing. So I think that's the kind of message he's giving them. There's nothing necessarily to do with anything else. So it might be a bit rambly, but just those kind of ideas I think might be useful as well. I did have a few questions though. So, and this is mainly about what I mentioned about denuclearization. So you see all these, as you explained, all these different factors about why they nuclearized. And now all the talk is about denuclearization. Well, some people say that's not possible, but if denuclearization was possible, what are the main factors that you see that occurring in the future? So I think purely from a securitization aspect, South Korea is obviously becoming more security conscious in the last, say, decade or so, or even longer than that. So South Korea is militarizing, the US is militarizing. So the external factors are probably not going to be susceptible to denuclearization. Internal factors don't seem to be changing either. So for me, it's quite a pessimistic outlook, but I'd like to hear what you think might change North Korea towards not wanting nuclear weapons, if that's possible at all. So that's all for the nuclear stuff. So the cyber things I thought was quite interesting as well. So for Hansfred, I thought it was a good attempt, but I kind of had the same critique. It was kind of like two completely different academic studies tried to shoehorn into one, and I think you would do vastly better by separating them completely. Because one of them you're talking about North Korea threats, and the other you're talking about domestic South Korean issues, and I don't think they're really that connected, despite them both being very good ideas. So on the North Korean front, you kind of concluded that North Korea can use its cyber prowess and capabilities for a lot of different things. And you think that we didn't really offer an explanation of what South Korea could do. So that was actually going to be my main question was, despite all these threats, you kind of mentioned, I forgot the term you used, deterrence by denial. So you mentioned that term, but I'd actually like to hear you extend on those ideas. I did read your paper as well, but just give it a bit of an extension on what you mean by that. Because I think from living in South Korea for many years, I thought their deterrence against cyber attacks was pretty dire, to be quite honest, compared to some other countries. So I'd like to kind of get your idea of why it's so weak, and is there a possible to actually change it in the future? I remember a few years when I was writing about the RGB kind of hacking into a lot of different areas and conducting different attacks. I kind of came to the conclusion that South Korea needed a more aggressive methodology that could be developed to kind of counter North Korean threats. So kind of maybe to both of you who wrote about cyber stuff, I'd like to hear your ideas in that area, because I think that would be a good thing to discuss. And the last one for cyber and just anything to do with technology. We know it's moving quickly and it's always going to be moving quickly. So do you think that South Korea can actually develop a good, robust way of deterring future threats? Because what I'm skeptical a little bit about is, you kind of both pointed to it but didn't say it, was that South Korea has been quite slow in responding to threats in the past. So do you think they actually have the ability at all to combat North Korea threats in the future? So I think a good example of that was briefly touched on was like the cryptocurrency attacks to a certain extent have been going on for years and years. South Korea hasn't really been able to very effectively combat that. Even the US to a certain extent has done through the FBI, through the Department of Justice, trying to combat that threat, but they haven't been overly successful necessarily. So I was just trying to ask, do you think there is actually any way for that to happen?